Good evening, everyone, once again. And so our first presenters for tonight belong to the Caribbean Youth Environment Network, or the CYEN. It's a non-profit, non-governmental organization that focuses its resources on empowering young citizens of the Caribbean and their communities, of course, to develop programs and actions to address socio-economic and environmental issues. CYEN in Trinidad and Tobago is the local branch of the Caribbean Youth Environment Network, and it was established in 2001. Michaela Hossain is an aspiring climate finance specialist who helps organizations to equitably access resources for their growth and success. Currently, she's the development associate at Youth Climate Justice Fund, the largest fund to support youth-led socio-economic solutions globally. She helps to mobilize resources for historically underfunded and marginalized groups. She has also been involved in youth climate activism and advocacy as the national coordinator of the Caribbean Youth Environment Network in Trinidad and Tobago, which is a community of young people empowering other youth to engage in sustainable development. Michaela has experience in climate change research, waste management, and policy. So I'd like to welcome Ms. Michaela Hossain to take the floor this evening.
Thank you for the introduction and the icebreaker, and welcome everybody. So I have a little presentation for you all today on climate change. I don't know how much you all know exactly about climate change, so I'm just going to share a little bit of basic information that you might know already. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the digital footprint and how that actually is related to climate change. So I'm going to share my screen now. Just give me a second. Right. Okay. So forgive me for my Canva here. This is my favorite thing for presentations. Right. Yes. So today we're going to look at the digital carbon footprint. So yes, unfortunately, as you can tell by the title, our use of these electronic devices that we're on right now in this meeting with, or our phones, our laptops, our tablets, all of these have an impact on the environment, and we're going to learn about it today. And not just the hardware we use, but also the software. So, first of all, before I go into what climate change is, I want to let you all know that there is a difference between weather and climate. So I'm not sure how many of you all may have, learned this in school, but a lot of people tend to confuse weather with climate. And, they tend to say, oh, well, today it was cold, so climate change can't be a real thing because, that means the temperature is getting hotter. But they are mistaking the weather, which is the short-term changes in the atmosphere, typically over a smaller area, for climate. But climate means the long-term patterns over a region. So when you see the weather person talking about the weather forecast in the news, they typically talk about the weather forecast for about a week, like that's probably the furthest time that you can predict the weather. Um, they would talk about tomorrow, it's going to be sunny or rainy and that sort of thing. And the weather is specific to certain regions. So in the east or the north of Trinidad, it might be sunny, but in the south, it could be rainy. So it's over small areas, we can have weather variations. While climate means long-term patterns over a region. So in Trinidad and Tobago, the climate is tropical marine. And that is because we are characterized by certain temperatures, like between the range of 20 and 30 degrees Celsius. That's our typical range. And we have winds coming from the ocean, and we have two seasons, the wet and the dry season. Whereas, as you see on the screen here, we could have a desert climate in more of the eastern hemisphere. You will see those, and they'll have a much larger range of temperatures that they experience. So that's a different climate. Or the Arctic or more temperate climates will experience different conditions in the long-term weather patterns in the atmosphere. So I hope that clears it up. And if anybody has any questions throughout this presentation, you can feel free to put it in the chat. But I know that we will also have, a session for questions after. So, uh, sorry. Right. So what is climate change? I'm sure you all are familiar with the term. Everybody is talking about climate change nowadays, but do you all actually know what it is? I'm pretty sure you would have learned that climate change refers to long-term shifts in temperature and weather patterns, right? So maybe you mightn't have learned that specific definition, but um, you can see that in your everyday life. Or if you talk to your parents or your grandparents, you might see them talking about how it wasn't so hot back in the day. Um, because climate change has affected Trinidad and Tobago and has caused long-term shifts in temperature and weather. So that means over a long period, our temperatures are on average higher than they used to be, let's say 30 years ago. Also now the weather patterns have shifted. For instance, the day with the highest amount of rainfall in the year used to be in the rainy season, but now it occurs in the dry season. So we have a lot more extreme shifts in weather and temperatures. So I'm sure you all had have noticed that these days. I have to be putting on the AC and the fan all the time in order to survive now. So, um, yeah. But I'm sure you may have heard that climate change is often human caused, right? The climate change that we talk about these days is caused by human activity, but some climate change can actually be natural, right? So hundreds of years ago, there have been shifts in temperature and climate. And this occurred, for instance, when we're talking about the Ice Age, that was many years ago. And because of shifts in the orbit of the Earth around the sun, um, you could see those changes in climate over a long term. But the climate change that we're talking about today is caused by humans. And this climate change is occurring more rapidly, and we've been able to correlate it with certain problems and certain characteristics that are occurring in our atmosphere right now. So I'm gonna just like go in a little bit into what causes climate change, right? Have any of you all ever heard about the greenhouse effect or are familiar with the greenhouse effect? You can let me know in the chat. I know it's on the screen here, but have you any of you all ever heard about it? Yeah. Did you know what it was, or did you just hear the term being thrown around? People tend to throw around these terms and not explain what it means. Yeah. Yeah. So they don't always teach this stuff in school, unfortunately. Yeah. But but it's a really important thing for us to understand how climate change occurs because this is affecting our lives, right? So the greenhouse effect is a key mechanism that causes climate change, right? But it's also key for our survival, right? It's something that we need. So greenhouse gases, if you ever like saw a greenhouse or learned about it, it's really for plants. It traps heat and allows the plants to grow in a warmer temperature, right? And this can be really useful in different climates, like more temperate climates per se. And it can be really helpful for the plant growth. But the greenhouse effect that we're talking about today doesn't actually involve a greenhouse, but it acts like a greenhouse, right? So greenhouse gases trap heat. Over the earth, we have a blanket of gases called the atmosphere. And in the atmosphere, we have greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide. You breathe out carbon dioxide. Every time you inhale, you take in oxygen, and every time you exhale, you breathe out carbon dioxide. So that's actually a greenhouse gas, but don't worry. It's okay. You're not contributing to climate change by breathing. Um, and methane or CH4, that's the molecule, carbon and hydrogen make it up, is also another greenhouse gas, as well as water vapor. Now, the more of these greenhouse gases are in the atmosphere, the more heat is trapped. So I'm going to tell you how this works. And we have other greenhouse gases as well. But these are just a couple simpler examples, right? So you can see here in this picture, the first picture on the left, that there are these arrows, and these arrows are radiation or heat coming from the sun to the earth, right? Now, when this heat comes to the earth, it hits the surface of the earth, and some of it bounces off the surface and goes right back into space. So if we had no greenhouse effect and no greenhouse gases, we would actually, like, the temperature of the earth would be much lower than it is right now. It would be like negative 15 degrees Celsius, and we wouldn't be able to actually survive. That'll be the average temperature, by the way. So it can be a lot colder in different places. Um, so because of the greenhouse effect, these gases actually trap some of that radiation in the atmosphere and keep us warmer in order for us to survive. Now, the problem with this is that if there are more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, it means that we'll have more heat being trapped. Just like if you were lying in bed and, you had no blanket, you were sleeping, and let your mom come and rest a blanket on top of you, you'll feel warmer, right? But if she comes every hour and keeps resting another blanket on top of you, just like that, you will also have accumulated more heat, and therefore you'll start sweating, right? So greenhouse gases work in the same way in that the gradual increase in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere has caused an increase in temperature and therefore shifts in the climate over time. So that's why this is so important. Now, when we talk about what has caused these greenhouse gases to enter the atmosphere, there are many different gases, right? So in terms of the main ones, fossil fuels are always talked about in regard to climate change. And the reason for that is because when you combust fossil fuels, you actually release carbon dioxide as a byproduct, and that's just released into the atmosphere, which means that there's more greenhouse gases to trap more heat. And we do a lot of combusting fossil fuels. So that means that we have a lot of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And how we've been able to sort of correlate this burning of fossil fuels with climate change is you see it mapped on graphs. We've mapped graphs of the increase in the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere with the temperature of the Earth, and that has increased over time as the greenhouse gas emissions have increased. So you can see that here with us generating power. We use fossil fuels to generate power or electricity for our homes and our businesses. We use it to fuel our cars. But there are other causes of climate change, of greenhouse gases being released into the atmosphere, which contributes to climate change as well. For instance, this first image on the left here, you can see a bunch of trees cut down. And trees are important because they absorb carbon dioxide. But by cutting down trees, then that means that there's less to absorb, less trees to absorb the carbon dioxide, and therefore more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But you also see a picture here of a farm, right? And that also contributes to climate change because we need to cut down trees in order to plant these crops. And these crops don't always absorb as much carbon dioxide as natural biodiverse forests do. Also, um, the production of livestock like cows That produces a lot of methane, which is another greenhouse gas. That is actually 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide. And also the production of waste, specifically organic waste, and in the way that we landfill it, when it decomposes, it can also produce methane. So that contributes also to climate change. But for us, the main causes of greenhouse gas emissions are power generation, transport, and industry. And this is very important in terms when we're talking about the digital footprint, because power generation is heavily linked to our demand for electricity. So, the more devices we have, or the more we use our devices, that means the more electricity we need, and that means the more fossil fuels we need to burn. And industry is also heavily linked to our demand for electronic devices because we need to make electronic devices to satisfy consumers' demand. Let's say I'm buying, the newest phone that comes out from iPhone or Android every year. Um, we need to satisfy that demand by increasing activities like mining, which contributes to deforestation, and other activities that require fossil fuels to be combusted. So these are the causes and main drivers of climate change that is caused by humans. Anthropogenic means human caused. So don't get too scared by the word. So before we go on, I just want to look a little bit at the impacts of climate change. And, the most recent one you would have probably seen people talk about is Hurricane Beryl, which is the earliest category 4. It actually was a category 5 hurricane before it made landfall, to occur in the hurricane season. And these sort of extreme weather patterns are happening because of the warmer sea surface temperature, which fuels hurricanes. The warmer the sea temperature is, the more water will evaporate and contribute to forming the hurricane. But you also see things like bushfires happening. You can also see a lot of vegetated areas going through desertification, so they'll be becoming like deserts in some places of the world, or some places are going through drought. So while others may be going through flooding, other places are going through drought. So these are the extreme temperature changes. And also because of a disruption in the ocean's temperature, and the ocean's currents are very important for regulating our temperature, we can even see some places getting colder. So global warming is more of a subset of climate change. Global warming really refers to the temperature of the Earth overall increasing. But climate change refers to these extreme events that occur. So some places, do get colder at certain times of the year than usual. So I know that this is sort of a damper. And, the first time I learned about climate change, I was like, wow, this is so horrible. But we can actually do a lot to help climate change. Um, we can act as a collective. It always tends to be impactful when we come together and we stand for something. So in terms of collective action, the best thing we can do as individuals is to stay updated on the government's actions on climate change and join a group to advocate for that change. Like CYEN, of course, I had to put in a plug for the Caribbean Youth Environment Network, but we do all things youth advocacy on sustainable development. Um, and also build community with others working on climate change and open your mind to new perspectives because there's a lot going on in this space. But in terms of individual actions, there's a lot we can also do. So don't be down. In terms of transport, you can take public transport to reduce your CO2 emissions footprint. You can plant trees. There's lots of tree planting efforts happening across Trinidad and Tobago. You can buy local food and products, which reduces emissions from importing that food or products. You can educate yourself and learn more about what is happening locally and how you could get involved, or internationally as well. And we can also try and use more energy efficient devices. For instance, you may have heard of fluorescent light bulbs, and they tend to use much less energy than the incandescent ones, which are the traditional ones, or LEDs. And then, you know, you must also take steps. Yes, we must take steps to try and help reduce our emissions, but we must also take steps to adapt to climate change, and to adapt to the new disasters that we will face, so that we must be prepared for these sort of disasters. Um, but that's not so much in the topic of today's discussion, because we're going to talk about electronics. And, a lot of electronics, the mining of them, as I mentioned before, contributes to climate change. So, if you can do things like repair your devices, or give them to electronic waste recycling initiatives, which there are a couple across the country, you can do that, and try to avoid using so much energy by using more energy efficient devices. So I will now pass it back on to our host, because that's the end of my presentation. Um, yeah, thank you. And you will hear more about the digital footprint from Dr. Maharaj.
All right. Thank you, Michaela. Thank you, Michaela. Um, our next our next presenter will be Mr. Savan Philip. All right, he's the project support coordinator of the CYEN in Trinidad and Tobago. He has a passion for science and our advancement as a people. He aims to use all that he has learned to lead humanity towards a better tomorrow, one day at a time. From biology, biochemistry, and even artificial intelligence, Savan offers expertise to move forward towards a sustainable future. Okay, my apologies. Mr. Philip, Mr. Philip is in fact not presenting. Um, our next speaker would be Dr. Maharaj from the Small Footprints Group, which I'm a member of. So it's my pleasure to present the Small Footprints Group. Representing is Dr. Maharaj, a district medical officer attached to SDHF. Holding a master's in public health and business administration, she has a keen interest in climate change. She resides in Pinal, a flood-prone area. Every year, she knows the effects of drastic weather changes and flooding, creating a WhatsApp flood group for her community, but thinks that more community action is needed. As such, she initiated this collaboration today to increase awareness of the digital footprints to the youths and to help increase social responsibility in using technology. I would like to present Dr. Nalini D. Maharaj. Dr. Maharaj.
Hi, you hearing me? Hearing?
Loud and clear.
Okay, good. See my screen?
Yep.
Right. Hi, everyone. I am Nalini, and I will be presenting on the digital footprint today. Right. So this is my brief outline. We will talk about defining digital footprint, use of technology in Trinidad and Tobago, look at the implications and strategies to reduce it. Right. So a digital footprint basically refers to the resultant carbon dioxide emissions produced by production, use, data transfer on digital devices and infrastructure. So I have a question for you all. What percentage do you think Trinidad and Tobago's population will use social media? Anyone answer? 20%, 50%, 80%. Take a guess. Oh,
80%.
80%. Any other takers?
80%.
I
Okay.
definitely think that it's over 50, so I will go with 80 as well.
All right. Okay, so let's see what the research shows. So 1.23 million people in Trinidad and Tobago have access to internet, which represents 80% of the population. Of those, around 54.2% uses social media. So it was more than 50%, right? And no matter what age group you look at, slightly more females use the internet. So you know those advertisements that keep popping up? Well, they generate data, and it's called Meta's advertising resources. And what it showed for our country early in 2024, 51% of our population, which is around 784,200 users, use Facebook. So that's our go-to social media. And it increased by 55,000 users in the last year. However, don't forget that Instagram, who's coming up right behind. For early 2024, there were over 684,000 users, representing 44.5% of our population. And that was alarmingly increasing in the last year, over 119,000 users. This one was taken for Facebook in particular, and it shows a breakdown of the age groups. So if you notice, the 25 to 34 age group is the most commonly used age group for social media, followed by the 35 to 45, and then the 18 to 24. So I want you all to remember those ages. And of course, at each age group, you see women using it slightly more than men. So why do we use technology? Well, it really is a multifactorial thing. For many young people, it's employment, education, staying connected with friends and family, entertainment, shopping, staying informed. Some people use it for inspiration, all those happy Monday morning quotes you get, discovering content, and even social causes like today, where we are trying to make a dent in climate change. But we unknowingly produce large digital carbon footprints. So globally, digital pollution accounts for 4% of global greenhouse gases or emissions, and that is double that of the global aviation industry, according to UNICEF. And this is expected to double by 2025. So what do you think would be the impact of using these devices? None, minimal, same as driving a car, or unknown? Any guess? No guesses? Okay, so let's take a look at what will be some of the impacts. So the impact of technology use. If you were to video conference with all our videos on for 1 hour, we would produce 1 kilogram of carbon dioxide. If we were to live stream using a platform such as YouTube or Netflix, you can produce up to 36 grams of carbon dioxide. In the US, study shows that 63% of the people who live stream are between that age group 18 to 34. Remember when I told you to remember that age group earlier? So if we were all watching videos every year, that produces over 300 million tons of carbon dioxide, which accounts for 1% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. And all these things, there are lots of global projects going around to try to measure the impact of technology use, right? So this slide I put here because I want us to remember where we get our source of data from. So if you looked at media articles such as the New York Post, CBC, and Yahoo, they were claiming that if you watch half an hour of Netflix, you were generating 1.6 kilograms of carbon dioxide, which is almost the same as driving 4 miles. However, when you look at the scientific articles, they show that it is actually 1/8 of that guesstimate, which is only 0.2 kilograms in that half an hour. However, earlier this year, Netflix had around 200 and almost 70 million paid subscribers. So while the carbon emission for one person might be insignificant, combine that by 270 million. So look at this picture here. So UK found that if you were to send one less email every day, it reduced your carbon emission up to 16,433 tons a year, which is the same as taking 3,300 diesel cars off the road. And that's a globe outlook for a country. But let's look at an email that one person may send. For every spam email, that's 0.3 grams. And again, you multiply that by 1,000 people, that's 300 grams. 4 grams for a regular email, 50 grams for an email attached with a photo. So putting all of this into perspective for one person, if you was to send around 65 emails, then that is about driving a little over a mile in carbon dioxide emissions. So how do we reduce our digital footprint? So there are simple strategies we can use. Michaela talked about buying the latest phone. However, if we resist the urge to upgrade whenever a new smartphone or computer model is released and use our devices for at least 5 years, that can help. There's also a phenomenon called planned obsolescence, and basically it's looking at the manufacturer's date and thinking that's the shelf life only of the product. Sometimes it can last longer, so as long as the device works, use it. And you can also consider selling your products or donating it to a local organization rather than just piling it up in a room. And we know Trinidad and Tobago has a very active marketplace. You can get a secondhand phone on Facebook any hour, any day. So you can also power down your device if you do not plan to use it for more than two hours. Turning on the brightness on your device by dimming the display up to 70% can actually save you 20% of energy used on your monitor. We encourage you to unplug your chargers, televisions, and desktop computers when not in use, especially when leaving home for an extended period of time. There is something called phantom power. So although you may turn off your device and it's still plugged in, it can still suck up almost 25% of all energy consumed in the home. Plug devices into our power strip or surge protector. So instead of spending, say, a minute to turn off 5 devices, you can just flip a switch off and it will disconnect all energy flow to many devices. So you want to also limit unnecessary streaming. So while we can't fault ourselves for kicking back and enjoying a good movie, you would want to try to limit your unnecessary streaming whenever possible. So for example, if you got a phone call or you had to leave the room, you would want to pause that movie. Or if you know you're very sleepy, you can put a timer onto your device so it can turn off. And you also want to turn off your autoplay on YouTube. Close down tabs that might be playing video ads without your knowledge. Emails. Emails more mindfully. So while emails are more environmentally sustainable than delivering a physical letter and only uses 1.7% of energy, it still comes at a cost, which we discussed earlier. Avoid unnecessary email by skipping the pleasantries and the thank yous, and find co-workers at the office and talk to them in person. Delete all emails from cluttering your inbox and unsubscribe from those mailing lists that you really do not need. So now what? Right, so we are asking participants today to go onto your Apple Store or your Play Store and download this app called the Climate Campaigners, right? And we are also asking you to take a step further and join our Small Footprints TNT group, right? Where we would try to do weekly engagements and challenges and help encourage each other to reduce our digital footprint one step at a time. Unfortunately, you'll have to follow me first at Nalini M from Penal, and then we'll join you onto the group, right? So these are my long list of references, and I thank you for your time and any questions at this point.
All right, everyone. I would like to thank Dr. Maharaj for her contribution and for that presentation. We'd like to open the floor for questions now. You can put the questions in the chat. Alternatively, you could open your mic and speak if you'd like to. All right.
We are also asking everyone to fill out the feedback form in the chat before you leave.
Yeah, just a reminder regarding the feedback form. Um, there's a link that Adana just sent in a group chat. Well, in the chat for this Zoom meeting. So you'd appreciate it if you could check it out a little before you leave. But I do have a question though. I heard you mention that emails contribute to your carbon footprint, which is not entirely surprising, but I saw that one of the suggestions was that you skip the pleasantries. So I was wondering if it is that the content of the emails is what determines the carbon expenditure, or if it's, well, of course, I know the process of delivery would determine that as well. But does the content of the emails contribute to the carbon expenditure?
May I take this question?
Oh, well, it's kind of directed to Dr. Maharaj, I
Yeah.
guess.
Okay,
Right.
my apologies.
Right. So it was saying if you were to attach a photo, you would be emitting something up to like 50 grams. And if it's just a plain email, it's just 4 grams. However, when they say try and avoid the pleasantries, like every email you get, you don't have to respond. I mean, yes, you have your work obligations, but not every single email you have to say acknowledged, noted with thanks. I think that is what they mean. And that's why they was encouraging you to have more in-person talks than just keep sending emails over and over.
Mm, okay, I understand. No problem. But yeah. Questions? The floor is open for questions if anybody has any questions. Okay. Well, if there are no questions, I'd like to hand over to Adana DeLeo. And she would wrap us up for the evening. All right, so Adana.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It is my great honor and privilege to deliver the vote of thanks this evening. Firstly, I would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to the MYDNS for their generous seed funding. Firstly, your support has been instrumental in turning our vision into reality and empowering us to make a meaningful impact. I would also like to thank the Caribbean Youth Environment Network for their unwavering support and collaboration. Your dedication to environmental advocacy inspires us all, and we are proud to walk alongside you in this important mission. A special thanks goes to the IAMovement for providing the Zoom meeting link, enabling us to connect and engage with each other seamlessly. Your efforts in fostering digital connectivity are greatly appreciated. Also, I am particularly grateful to my colleagues at the Small Footprint for their tireless efforts and dedication. Your commitment to promoting a minimal digital footprint and environmental sustainability has been invaluable. Your hard work and passion drive our mission forward and inspire all of us to be more mindful of our digital interactions. Lastly, I encourage everyone here to join the climate campaigners app. Together, we can amplify our efforts and drive meaningful change for a sustainable future. Thank you once again to everyone for your participation and support. Let us continue to work together towards a greener, more sustainable world. Have a great and wonderful weekend.